I'm 81 years old now, and if someone asked me today the exact moment when I started lying to myself about what it means to be a man, I could answer very precisely. It didn't happen in old age. It didn't happen in marriage. It didn't even happen after my first betrayal. It happened much earlier, when I was just a boy, and I heard grown men laughing at another man because he had lost his edge. I was maybe 13. I didn't fully understand what they were talking about, but one thing stayed with me. A man is valuable as long as there is strength in him, hunger, desire, tension, fire. And when that fire begins to fade, a man slowly disappears. I believed that idea so deeply that I lived under it for most of my life. By the time I was 22, I had already become one of those young men who know how to laugh loudly, hold a glass confidently, look a woman straight in the eyes, and speak as if they know exactly what they want. The truth is, I knew nothing. I was just terrified of looking weak. My friends and I used to sit in a bar near the university. Cheap beer, loud music, too much confidence. One night, a friend of mine said something that sounded almost like wisdom at the time. He said, "If women look at you, it means you're living life the right way." Everyone laughed. I laughed too. But inside, it wasn't funny to me. I needed it to be true. Because if it was true, then all my anxiety had meaning. That same year, I met Laura. She worked at a small bookstore on the corner of our street. She wore her dark hair shorter than most women did back then, and she had this habit of looking at people as if she could see more than they wanted to show. The first time I walked into that store was by accident, but after that, I kept coming back on purpose. At first, we talked about books, then about films, then about things I had never really talked about with anyone. She wasn't like the girls I had known before. You couldn't win her with a clever line or a confident smile. With her, you had to actually be present, and that is exactly why I fell in love with her. I remember the first night we stayed together. I remember how she laughed quietly, almost in a whisper. And I remember that after we made love, she lay next to me with her hand resting on my chest and said something that surprised me. She said, "You're always tense, even when you're happy." I laughed it off. I told her it was because I was young, because I wanted everything at once. But the truth was something else entirely. I didn't know how to relax. Even love, for me, was a kind of performance. I didn't just want to be with a woman. I wanted to feel that next to her. I was somebody, that I mattered, that I was strong, that I was desired. And in that need, my future defeat was already hiding. Laura was the first person who saw that I wasn't simply moving forward in life. I was constantly running. One evening, we were sitting by the river, watching the water move slowly in the dark. She turned to me and said quietly, "You always seem to be ahead of yourself. Like this moment is never enough for you." I felt uncomfortable immediately. I made a joke. I changed the subject. I kissed her so she would stop talking, and she did. But those words stayed with me longer than any love confession ever had. We broke up about 6 months later, not because of betrayal, not because of a dramatic fight. I simply began to grow colder. I told myself I was stuck, that there was still so much life ahead of me, that I had no right to settle down yet. She didn't cry when I left. She cried when she said something I didn't understand back then. She said, "You don't know how to love what you already have. You always need the next thing." At 22, I walked out of her apartment feeling like I had saved my freedom. At 81, I understand that it was the first time I lost something real, simply because I was afraid to stop running. Back then, I didn't call it fear. Back then, I called it being a man. By the time I turned 40, I had become the man I once dreamed of being. I had a respectable job, an expensive watch, a straight posture, and that familiar habit of looking at myself in the mirror before leaving the house, as if I needed to confirm one more time that the image was still holding together. From the outside, everything looked right. That was the period when I met Maria, and if Laura had been my first love, Maria became my real test. We met at a professional conference in Chicago. She wasn't the brightest woman in the room, not the one everyone turned to look at, but she was the only person I wanted to talk to for more than 5 minutes. With her, I could have stayed in that conversation all evening. She had a calmness that both irritated me and attracted me at the same time. She listened carefully, but she didn't admire me automatically. My suit didn't impress her. My connections didn't impress her. The way I spoke didn't impress her either. And that's exactly why I wanted her more than anyone before. We started seeing each other. First lunches, then dinners, then hotel rooms during business trips, then mornings when she would make coffee wearing my shirt, and I would watch her move around the kitchen thinking that maybe I had finally found something like adult love. But the truth is, even then I was still playing the same old game. What mattered to me wasn't who she was. What mattered was who I felt I became next to her. Maria made me calmer, and for some reason I didn't see that as a gift. I saw it as a threat, because when a man lives on the adrenaline of constant validation, calmness starts to feel like fading away. I remember one evening very clearly. We were sitting in her kitchen. It was raining outside. She stayed quiet for a long time. Then she said something that stopped me. "You behave like someone who constantly needs to be convinced that he deserves love." I forced a smile and told her that sounded a little too psychological. She didn't smile back. She said quietly, "No, it's just the truth. You don't know how to be loved peacefully. You always need tension. Proof. The hunt." And do you know what I did? I got offended, not because she was wrong, but because she saw me too clearly. After that evening, I slowly began to pull away. I stayed longer at work. My replies became shorter. Sometimes I left her messages unanswered for hours on purpose, just so I could feel that the control was still in my hands. It was childish, pathetic even, but also painfully masculine. One night she called me and asked, "Are you with someone else right now?" At that moment, I hadn't betrayed her physically yet, but I paused for too long. She understood everything from that silence. A month later, I really did betray her. It was a younger woman from work, someone who looked at me as if I wasn't just a man, but an event. And in that moment, it felt more important than anything else. Maria didn't find out immediately, but when she did, she didn't scream. She didn't make a scene. She simply said something that cut deeper than any accusation ever could. She said, "Once again, you chose a feeling instead of a person." I still remember her face that night. No tears, no hysteria, just exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from one betrayal, but from living too long beside someone else's ego. She left, and for the first time in my life, what I felt wasn't drama. It was emptiness, real emptiness, shameful emptiness. the kind that can't be filled with a new body, a new compliment, or another night of attention. But even then, I didn't stop. I just learned how to hide that emptiness better. And now, looking back, I understand something I didn't know then. That was the real illness I was living with all those years. After 60, life begins to behave strangely. It doesn't break suddenly the way it does in movies. No one flips a switch and says, "Now you are old." No. Life simply starts taking things away quietly. Things you once believed would always stay the same. At first, I didn't notice it. I was still working, still going out, sometimes still meeting women, because old habits don't disappear quickly. But something was slowly changing. It was as if the lights in a room were fading little by little, and I stubbornly pretended everything was still bright. One evening, I was sitting in a restaurant with a woman almost 20 years younger than me. Years ago, dinners like that filled me with pride. I liked catching the looks of people around the room. I liked the way waiters spoke to me with a little extra respect. But that night, something felt different. She laughed. She leaned closer. She touched my hand. She told me funny stories about her job. And suddenly, I felt tired. Not physically tired, something deeper. It felt like I was watching a play I had already seen too many times. I looked at her and suddenly understood something that startled me. This scene had happened in my life dozens of times. Different faces, different dresses, different voices, but the same script. And then a thought appeared in my mind that frightened me. When did it become so empty? I listened to her. I nodded. I smiled. But inside me there was no longer the fire that once made moments like this feel alive. For the first time in my life, I realized I didn't want to prove anything. Not to her, not to the people in the room, not even to myself. That night, I went home earlier than she expected. I told her I was tired. She looked surprised, but she smiled politely and said we could meet another time. I knew there would not be another time. A few months later, something happened that hit me much harder. I walked into the small supermarket near my house. It was an ordinary day. I picked up bread, milk, a few small things. When I reached the checkout line, I suddenly saw a familiar face. Maria, the woman I once loved, and the woman I destroyed. She stood a few people ahead of me. Her hair was shorter now. A few silver strands had appeared, but her posture was still the same calm one I remembered. Next to her stood a man. He held her hand, simply, comfortably, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. They were laughing about something small. I think he had made a mistake at the register, and there I stood, 2 meters away, holding my bag of groceries. And suddenly, I understood something I had refused to admit for years. That woman could have lived a quiet, peaceful life with me. She could have laughed like that beside me. But I chose something else. I chose my pride, my need to feel desired, my endless chase for something new. She didn't notice me, and that was right. Because the man I had been back then was someone I would not want to see either. When I came home that evening, the apartment felt strangely empty, not just quiet. Empty. I placed the groceries on the kitchen counter and stood by the window for a long time, looking at the dark street. For the first time in many years, I did not try to escape the silence. I sat there in the dark and began thinking about all those years when I kept chasing new feelings, new women, new proof that I still mattered. And suddenly, I realized something painfully simple. In that endless chase, I wasn't just losing people, I was slowly losing myself. And the most frightening part was this: I only noticed it when most of the doors had already closed. I am 81 years old now, and strangely enough, the most important lesson of my life did not come from a woman or a friend or even a doctor. It came from a young man who was maybe 20 years old. This happened a few weeks ago. I was standing in line at a supermarket. In front of me, there was a young couple. They were arguing, quietly, but I could hear every word. The young man was speaking sharply, impatiently. The girl was silent. And then he said something that suddenly made my whole body tense. He said, "Where are you going to go? You love me too much to leave." And I felt something cold tighten inside my chest, because I had heard those words before. I had said them myself many years ago, almost the same way, with the same tone. In that moment, I suddenly saw my younger self. I saw how I must have looked from the outside, confident, arrogant, convinced that love was something guaranteed. The girl didn't answer him. She simply picked up her bag of groceries and slowly walked toward the exit. The young man stood there for a few seconds like he didn't understand what had just happened. Then he ran after her. And you know what hurt the most? I already knew what would happen next, because I had lived that story before, and I knew there was a chance he would not catch her. I paid for my groceries and walked outside. They were standing near the entrance. The young man was speaking quickly now, almost apologizing. The girl looked at him very quietly. Then she said one sentence. "You think love makes me weak. The truth is, it only makes me stay longer than I should." She got into her car and drove away. The young man remained standing alone in the parking lot. And in that moment, I realized something that had never crossed my mind before. Women don't leave when they stop loving you. They leave when they get tired of waiting to be respected. I went home that night and sat in silence for a long time. I thought about all the moments when I could have acted differently, all the times I could have said a simple thank you, all the times I could have apologized, all the times I could have chosen kindness instead of pride. But life has a strange rule. It allows us to understand our mistakes only when we can no longer fix them. And that night, I understood something clearly. The most dangerous person in the world is not your enemy. The most dangerous person is a man who believes he will always be loved, because that belief makes him behave as if that love has no value. I am 81 years old now, and you know what is strange? I have finally become the man I should have been many years ago. Calm, patient, grateful for simple things. The only problem is, now there is no one left beside me to see it.